I'm opening up the show talking about this sort of purposelessness that seems to have taken over in the country that is leading to massive levels of unhappiness and distorted sense of reality in so many young people out there. And how do you handle it? What should happen? We're talking about age limits because the government is becoming aware of this crisis that is playing out in slow motion in many ways across this country. And I think the government idea of instituting age limits makes a lot of sense. The problem with all of this is, and I'm sure many of you have experienced it, your kids are way smarter at figuring out ways to use social media than you are at keeping them from using social media. The amount of young girls, teenage girls in particular, who are really suffering in today's America. And I don't think we are discussing this enough, but this came out of a survey, and I'm reading from the Wall Street Journal. This is a CDC survey on youth behavior, and it said 57% of high school girls in the past year experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. And this number, I couldn't get out of my head. 30% of high school girls seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. 30%. 57% basically massively depressed. Now, the reality is, teenagers, as you well know, often are fraught with emotions. And the teenage years can be very, very difficult. If you go back and remember your own teenage years, how much time did it seem like passed between, say, when you were a freshman to when you were a senior compared to 2018 to now? It probably, if you're listening to me right now, 2018, you could snap your fingers. It felt like it just was here. And if you're and that has to do with the telescoping effect of time. When you're younger, that those years are so impressed upon you because you've had relatively few of them. And as you get older, years pass and don't seem to leave as big of a significant mark on your life. That's kind of the way our minds work. But what is going on right now? That 57% of teenage girls are basically suffering from some form of depression, and 30% of teenage girls have thought about killing themselves in the past year. And these numbers continue to get worse year after year because we have a baseline upon which we can measure these. And you know where? This is probably not going to stun all of you, but it might stun some of you. Do you know when these rates of suicidal ideation and when these rates of massive depression, particularly among teenage girls, although teenage boys are also impacted, really took off? When social media became prevalent in this country. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because Instagram in particular, which is where a lot of teenage girls spend their time, is, even in social media, which is an artificial construct. I've argued for a long time that social media is akin to Carnival Funhouse mirrors. That's the analogy, the metaphor that I would lay out for you. Where if you've ever been to a carnival and you walk and you stop in front of those funhouse mirrors where they can show you and they make you look way fatter than you actually are, they make you look way skinnier than you actually are. When it shows your body in a non-realistic fashion, that's played for laughs. You've probably stood in front of one of those mirrors before. But when we use those mirrors, which is basically social media, as a representation of how we should behave. Oh, you're not at all super skinny, but that's what it looks like in the mirror, and so you adjust your diet because of it. Or you think, well, maybe I'm not actually, needing to pay attention to what I eat. It's a really terrifying metaphor, because the feedback that you're getting from that mirror is wildly unhealthy for you if you take it in a serious way. And I think, unfortunately, what has happened, and it is impacting young people more than anybody else, which I have a theory on as well, I think what has happened is those artificial funhouse mirror distortions are lodged now in teenage brains, and it's leading to a profound sense of purposelessness and unhappiness that's connected with that. And my theory is this is the people that are most fertile to embrace the woke virus, which has run rampant throughout this country since social media came into effect. This is a big picture idea that I want to share with you. If you are feeling intensely unhappy, and if you are feeling psychologically unwell, you are going to project those feelings that you have internally, I really do believe, on the larger country and the world as well. And so the internal strife that you are feeling makes you believe that the country as a whole is also awful. And this is the territory that Democrats are plunging and taking advantage of more so than anyone out there. They have recognized this massive lack of purpose that has taken over in a social media age, and they have weaponized it by telling all these young people, your country is awful, your country is sick, your country is not a story of righteousness. America is founded on evil and venality, and therefore you cannot support anything in America. And if you think about that, the woke virus is taking over in these young people because they're so profoundly unhappy with their own self and their self-image in the world because of what they're seeing reflected on social media. And I think it's particularly pernicious on Instagram. I want to open up phone calls, and I want to hear from parents and grandparents about this. And also, if by chance you're a young person in your teens, maybe you're out of school today, in your 20s, I'd be curious to hear about the impact as well, because in addition to giving you an artificial version of the real world on social media, it's also giving you, I think in particular for girls, the people who are most popular on Instagram, this is not going to stun you, are incredibly good looking. And they have all the latest fashion, and they have all the latest clothes, and they are popular almost entirely on a cosmetic basis. Not for what they say primarily, not even necessarily for what they do, but almost entirely for how they look. And what I would suggest to you is, well, you might say, well, that's not uncommon. You know, we've had Playboy for a long time. We've had Maxim magazine back in the day. What I would suggest to you, though, is that there used to be a relative handful of people who were somewhat famous. You know, the Pamela Andersons of the world, that era. Instead of mass fame, now we have a lot of small level fame. The best looking girl in a high school, the best looking girl in a sorority, and those people become very famous for their looks in those small social circles, and their lifestyle and the way that they carry themselves is making all these other girls who are not as good looking, who may not be as self-confident, it's making them wildly unhappy in their own lives. Because you might have not, You might have known that the captain of the cheerleading squad was really popular in 1984 and 1994, but you didn't see her posting bikini pics every day on your social media feeds. And there are lots of interesting discussions about what should happen, what could happen. And I don't claim to be an expert on this. I've got 3 boys, one teenager, one about to be a teenager. They seem to spend their time on social media in a very different way. I don't have girls. They sit around on social media and watch Madden videos, right? How do I play Fortnite better? I'm not sure that that's super healthy, but I don't think it reflects upon their own self-image in the way that's happening for teenage girls. And I think that may explain why the desire to commit suicide, for instance, is wildly higher among girls, and also why they're much more unhappy than boys. I don't think social media is particularly healthy for anyone, but I do think that for young girls, it's probably the least healthy of all. And how do we fix this? It's a big topic, big discussion. Senator Josh Hawley, who may join us later in this week, he's instituted a bill that would ban anyone younger than 16 from using social media because the brains are so young, because people are not ready for that opportunity. I can see the logic there. We don't let 13-year-olds drive cars. Why should we let them have social media accounts? Now, kids can still lie. I want to have a big discussion about this. I want to hear from you guys out there as well. I think this is among the most serious issues that is facing our country right now, and I don't think it's talked about enough, even though I bet many of you out there are sensing this, feel it, and see it in your own existence, in your own families. Now, I'm opening up the show talking about this sort of purposelessness that seems to have taken over in the country that is leading to massive levels of unhappiness and distorted sense of reality in so many young people out there. And how do you handle it? What should happen? We're talking about age limits because the government is becoming aware of this crisis that is playing out in slow motion in many ways across this country. And I think the government idea of instituting age limits makes a lot of sense. The problem with all of this is, and I'm sure many of you have experienced it, your kids are way smarter at figuring out ways to use social media than you are at keeping them from using social media. We won't let, for instance, my 15-year-old be active on social media. His mom puts limits on his phone. He's not able to go to all these different apps. He complains about it to a certain extent. He's also smart enough to get around some of those safeguards. So what is the appropriate way to handle it? Because you also don't want kids to be totally bereft of interaction with their friends. But I think all this ties in because in this social media era, they're not actually going out and doing things on the same level that you or I would have. For instance, I saw a study the other day. You know, most kids, when they turn 16, don't even try and get their driver's license anymore. When you or me turned 16, that was the pathway to freedom. Everybody wanted pretty much to go out and get their driver's license immediately. Kids are so fearful and so hung up on their phones these days that they won't even go out and interact face-to-face like they used to. It's wild to think about. I think this is hitting on a topic that many of you are experiencing out there in terms of this social media impact. And I'm citing this Wall Street Journal article that I was reading yesterday. I mentioned it on the show. 30% of teenage girls say they seriously considered attempting suicide last year. 30%. Almost 1 in every 3. 57% said they experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. I think COVID certainly impacted and accelerated some of this feelings, taking kids out of school, keeping them away from peers, convincing them that they were under mortal peril from a virus that bore them no threat at all. As I've said for a long time, your kid is more likely to die riding to school with you in the car than they ever were from COVID. Yet, all of that conspiring with the rise of social media. And we got a lot of people who want to weigh in. Let me go to Lisa in Spring Hill, Florida. Lisa, you've been a teacher for 20 years, you say, and you have seen a real shift in the way that kids are behaving. Tell us what you've seen.
Hi, Clay. So I was an educator for 20 years, and I still have a large amount of contact with the young adults that I was their teacher. And I've seen just a total shift in the way that they interact with each other, their parents, how they are dressing, their behaviors, their social gatherings. Everything has been affected by all of this. And I see them being very dark in their appearance. You know, beautiful colors and beautiful ways of dressing are not apparent anymore for either of the genders. And I also see that this has had such a huge impact on how they think of themselves, even regarding their sexuality. And it's very sad and depressing. I am also a mom of 3 boys that I raised by myself, and I see how this has impacted them and their interactions with mostly the females that are very aggressive in pursuing them. And I see it just total shift change in all of the interactions with all of the young people I'm involved with.
Thanks for the call. You know, oftentimes the impact of technology is far more significant and immediate than our understanding of what that impact is going to be. And I don't think it's coincidental that America has been racked by tumult, and it's almost completely connected, in my opinion, to the rise of this new social media phenomenon. And I think we're just starting to understand how it is changing human behavior in a very substantial way. It's risen the anecdote, right? Something that is not representative of what usually happens, into the driving force of public policy, for instance. The George Floyd incident was awful to watch on video. It wasn't, however, representative of how most people interact with the police on a daily basis. The reason it was newsworthy was because it was so rare. But then social media demands that you respond to this rare anecdotal incident, and you create new systems that oftentimes are destroying the underlying basis upon which they were created, i.e. defund the police. Police officer may do something bad. We just saw it with Tyree Nichols. It doesn't mean all police officers are bad, or that by responding to that anecdotal video and changing things, you actually may be creating a recipe for far more awful things to occur. We would be far better off, I think, if we did less to respond to social media instead of more. Ryan in Houston, you've got 3 daughters, and you said the first one was so impacted by social media, it impacted you how you handled the 2 younger ones.
Yeah, Clay, thanks for bringing this to your platform and everyone's attention, because, unfortunately, as a parent, I had to, kind of learn the hard way. Our oldest 10 years ago was growing up in her preteens and the, advent of social media and smartphone popularity. And it led to some really severe mental health issues, self-harming. And when
did they start with her? What age was she when you noticed that maybe her behavior was changing as it was associated with social media?
Well, we let her have it in middle school, which is 11, 12, 13-year-old, that age group. Yep. And it was an immediate impact, and it caused us to change the way that we raised our next 2 daughters and hopefully learn from our own mistakes. And and they haven't had those challenges. Because
what did you change? How did you change the first daughter's the things that happened for her in a negative way caused you to do what for daughters 2 and 3?
So we became more engaged in their interest in social media when we did allow them to have social. We didn't allow them to have it until after they were 13. And we actually, we had our own TikTok accounts, Twitter accounts, Snapchat accounts. We told them, if you're on it, we're on it. We're following you. And then we have conversations about it. We know what's trending. We know what's out there. And we just became better, more educated as parents so that we could get ahead of anything that could negatively impact them. And it's really made a big difference in our second and third daughter's lives. So thank you so much.
So for everybody out there who is listening to us right now, I know a lot of parents are busy. Certainly I'd put that myself and my wife in that camp. For you, it was something where if they're going to be on social media, you had to be there as well as a parent, sort of aggressively policing, for lack of a better way to phrase it, what their behavior was on social media.
Absolutely. And have open conversations about it. Be open to being engaged in that part of their life and not have them have to hide it. That's when we get in trouble as parents. We don't know what's going on, and the kids feel like they have to hide it, and it just leads them down this negative path of, that it's hard to get away from.
Thank you for the call, and thank you for giving us that story. Stephen in Mesa, Arizona, you're concerned about big government involvement in social media, which certainly I imagine others are as well.
Yeah, you just made that comment about something about legislation being brought up about regulating the age. And, I thought our whole conservative movement was less government control, more in the hands
but let me just pause here. I understand that argument, but I think you would probably acknowledge kids can't get driver's license until 16 years old. That makes sense. Kids can't join the military or graduate from high school typically until they're 18. They reach the age of majority. I think you'd probably agree that makes sense. We could agree or disagree about something like, hey, what should the legal drinking age be? 21 is a bit arbitrary considering you can have a gun and go get shot serving your country overseas and you can't buy a beer here. But there are age restrictions that we put in place because we believe kids are not old enough to handle the responsibilities that come with driving a car, voting for president, or, for instance, buying a beer. I don't think it's crazy to ask the question of whether something that is common to that should also occur for social media.
Like your previous caller, I think it's more of the parents' responsibility to be involved. Like you said, when you're on, I'm on. We're following you. We know exactly
I get it,
what's
and
going on
I
in
wish.
social media life.
My concern is that a lot of parents are stretched thin, right? Regardless of what you do on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of parents are not technologically astute, and so you can be a great parent. I really do believe this. And have no idea what your kids are doing on TikTok. I think there are a lot of great parents out there that right now have kids on TikTok doing things and they have no idea they're on there because the kids are smarter about technology than the parents are. Now, my concern is just I don't think the safeguards are going to be that significant, right? If you go in now and you're 12 and you claim that you're 14 and you get an account, I think you have to be 13 years old to get a Facebook account, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know how Facebook regulates and proves that you are, not the age that you're claiming to be. So I agree with my concern, and thank you for the call, by the way. My concern is not with whether government should be involved here. It's whether we can come up with rules that are efficient and effective that make sense. Let me give you one. Do you know that there are kids getting raked over the coals every single day for something that they post on social media when they were 14 or 15 years old, when they become adults? If you're a kid out there and you're listening to me right now and you're about to go to college or you're about to go into the workforce, I would scrub all of your old social media because there's almost nothing that you can gain from it, and it creates potential headaches for you. But one thing that I think should be a national policy is, look, our general rule as it comes to adolescence, if you commit a crime as a juvenile, the entire reason we have a juvenile justice system is because we believe, based on your youth, that shouldn't follow you for the rest of your life. I bet there are people listening to us right now who did incredibly stupid, maybe even criminal things when you were 15 years old, when you were 16 years old. That then gets completely erased unless you're tried as an adult, and that's a different conversation. And typically, if you're tried as an adult for a crime, it would mean that the crime is very, very severe, and you have to be waived into an adult court. But most 15 and 16-year-old crimes are not that significant in the grand scheme of things. Maybe you were dumb and you stole something from a convenience store and you got caught. Maybe you were out and you and some other 16-year-old kid got into a fight and it was dumb and then they led to some sort of an arrest. You kind of get the sense for what a teenage kid could get in trouble for. We cut off your responsibility for those crimes when you become an adult. You know how often kids are getting in trouble now, not getting admitted to colleges, not getting jobs, losing opportunities because of things they did before they were 18? Let me just float at least one idea that I would like to see. How about we treat social media idiocy? If your kid is out there singing along to a rap song and there's a racial slur in it, does that really mean that kid shouldn't be able to go to college? Because that's happening now, where kids are losing their college admissions because they sing along to rap songs in a TikTok video. We need to have adults making adult decisions, but we also need, I think, nationwide parameters for what should be existing with social media. And I think later this week, we're going to have a good conversation with Senator Josh Hawley about this. By the way, appreciate all of you hanging out with us and having this conversation, because I do think it's a really significant one that isn't discussed enough in the larger context out there, and is super, super important for so many of you, not just with your kids, but with your grandkids. And by the way, grandparents, I think these are conversations you can have with your grandkids too. You may not understand all of social media, but understanding consequences is a big part of not just parenting, but also grandparenting. Aunts, uncles, a lot of other people out there too. Caller's been fantastic. Connie in Miami. We're discussing the rise of social media. You got 2 teenage boys and you work in IT and your husband does as well. What are your thoughts?
Hi. Thanks for having me. This topic really resonated with me. And I think when I hear about legislation, while there may be, a fit for that in some way, I think, in my opinion, it comes down to the core issue of, the child not being connected. And usually, if kids, regardless of any physical attributes, I used to be a music teacher years ago, regardless of physical attributes, if they have a strong bond with a brother, a sister, a mother, a father, or both, it makes a huge difference. And I think over time, I get it. It's really entertaining to give a baby, to give a toddler a gadget, and they're fully entertained, and you can focus on whatever you need to focus. But I think over time, and especially due to COVID, the level of, lack of human connections is crazy. And as you were talking about the article, nobody posts, in social media bad moments. They're just highlighting the best moments, which may or may not be indicative of their life as it is. So to me, it's not so much about regulating at what age. So I think some of that may be appropriate. But, and this is also not a critical comment on parents at all. I know, it's a difficult job. It's a difficult task, but it's making purposeful time. I have to tell you that when I received cards yesterday from my boys for Valentine's Day, they brought me to tears because they highlighted the time I take with them, how I'm involved in every, in their schooling and everything. And it doesn't happen overnight. But I think if a kid knows that their parent is right there, has their back, I think the amount of depressed kids on the verge of suicide, which is, super distressing and alarming, would be much lower. I
Thank
think
you for the
we
call.
need to focus more. Thank you.
No, I think that's a lot. I think one thing that she hit that I think needs to be hammered home is that social media is a highlight reel. And a lot of kids, if your lives don't feel like there's very many highlights, you are looking at the best moments of somebody else's life while you're sitting by yourself in your room and you are thinking to yourself, man, my life sucks. Well, actually, it's a curated highlight reel that you're watching. And I think that's hard for 13 and 14 and 15-year-old kids to understand. I also think it's omnipresent Because whereas you or I back in the day, you had a phone call, you could talk to a friend or maybe one or more friends on the phone in the evening when you weren't in school, when you were home by yourself. Now the immediate default is I'm going to get on social media and look at what everybody else is doing, and it creates an enormous sense, I think, of worthlessness. And again, I think there are just a lot of kids without purpose, and my big thesis would be that that's where the woke virus is taking root. These kids feel like they have no purpose, and as a result, they're buying into this sort of nihilism that is being sold as it pertains to the woke society.